All right, guys, welcome again. Some technical difficulties yet again. I wanted to just talk to you guys for a brief second because we're about to go into the defense's closing arguments. I do apologize for being away. Like I said, this trial stream did not go at all. It'll be one I'll remember forever because it's one that where, like I said, literally live in the stream, I got notified that my dad. Well, not anyways process started where I became aware of my dad's passing. But I've just had a lot on my plate. I've had to be doing a lot of things mobily. I haven't been present pretty much at all, and it was one I wanted to be present for because it's a stream that um has a lot to talk about, and I was going to have him on. Even that was part of what we were planning to do, to be talking around this time at the end of the trial and introducing to you guys. Unfortunately, other plans. The universe had other plans for us. But anyways, I'm continuing to have to deal with lots of different things. Planning as he's going to be having a funeral service coming up and on the 16th of this month. So all the way up onto there, I'm having to take care of his affairs and do lots of various different things. But I'm going to try to start. Doing the nightly again. I only obviously was 3 episodes in. That was something I was wanting to have him appear in. My wife, various different things I envisioned that to encompass. We're going to get back on track with all of that, even if I don't have the Oracle, the main advisor that I like to go to for all things legal and all of that. But anyways, I just wanted to give you, those of you that start this from the beginning, if you were wanting an update, just wanted to give you an update on what's going on. I'm going to be back on the road here in just a minute watching from mobile. But we just saw the state's closing argument, and they kind of shed some light on why we saw what we saw. And that was essentially all of the evidence we heard about all the various different things was basically to say that they were trying to prove foreseeability. Remember, foreseeability is a huge factor in a negligence case, right? You have to foresee that something deadly could occur. And that's what they were trying to pound home to the jury, is that the entirety of her behavior, her actions, her mindset, that it should have been foresaw that the way she was acting and handling the set, the way it was going. Now, the defense is going to argue a high level, and we're going to see that here in a minute, as we're a few minutes behind the live, but not too much. But the defense is going to argue that basically the corporation of Rust and the mistakes they made gets in the way of that she was just an employee and part of a bigger problem, that in a bigger negligence problem, one of them being understaffing the armory staff, not having more than one armor, having her have various different duties, and just overall putting cost over safety. And that's the defense's theme. Whether it will land with this jury, I don't know. I know there's a juror on there that made it clear they want to be done with this case by tomorrow. So I think that's going to be a juror, whatever position they take, they're going to be the one that's going to be leading the way, saying, come to my side or else, and if that person was assertive enough to assert themselves to the judge that they have a time issue, I wouldn't be surprised if they're not going to be assertive enough when they have a position that they're going to try to influence other jurors. But I think if I had to see this coming, I think the weakest case they have is on the destruction of evidence. I understand the state says, well, we charged it as destruction of evidence. Well, evidence of what? And there is, unfortunately, the state is a long way from proving what was in her hands. Now, I know that woman is a past addict and might have familiarity with certain things. There's just no way to say beyond a reasonable doubt that it was what it was in her hands or that she destroyed anything. And Hannah Gutierrez didn't ask her to destroy anything. She just said, hold this, and then asked for it back. So I feel like, to me, if you're arguing destruction of evidence, that's not destruction of evidence. That's take this, please. I mean, for all we know, there could have been another reason why. We don't know what the circumstances were. We don't know what all of it was. I mean, who knows? That's a crime of intent, and I think they're a long way from proving it. But I think they felt like maybe that would be a bargaining chip with a jury that says, we don't think we got this charge, but we're finding her guilty of that charge. But I don't even think that's going to be the case. I think that's going to be a not guilty, in my opinion, just from the evidence that I heard of that. But still think today, I think the state did enough to prove that she obviously, as an armorer, can foresee if you don't secure bullets. This is why I really wish they would have streamlined their case. I understand they wanted to just kind of have the whole thing of her mindset, but it doesn't take 10 days of evidence to show that if you don't follow the protocols to secure live rounds of ammunition and make sure they're not going to be in the dummy ammunition, that doing that could result in death of someone. It could result in if an accidental discharge occurs, that someone dies. And I understand they got to prove kind of also, I guess, that the circumstances were ripe based on how she was handling firearms, her lack of securing firearms, that an accidental discharge could absolutely occur, that actors weren't trained, that basically just the entirety of the situation. So I guess I kind of understand why they went into what they did. But I think the state did a very good job of proving that Hannah Gutierrez, even though she was undermanned, even though she was understaffed, even though she probably shouldn't have been the armorer, even though she was probably hired on by a production that was clearly trying to take every cost-cutting measure they could, I still believe her as armorer should have done every step she could have taken to secure firearms, because she should have understood that the consequences of not doing that are absolutely catastrophic. And it does not take, you don't have to be an expert on firearms to understand that. So when she didn't take those steps, when she was derelict in her duty, when she said, I don't care, when she's expressing, as she said, I'm not responsible for every, and again, that's the attitude that I don't like, that I heard from her. To me, that sealed it, because she was responsible. She didn't want that responsibility. She wanted to put it off on others. She didn't like having to fool whatever, but you shouldn't have taken the job then. She took the job to get credits. Obviously, in her mind, she didn't think that, as a lot of people, a lot of immature people fail to see sometimes. They don't see that things can happen. In her mind, it was just like, God, I'm having to do all of this responsibility for this little bit of pay. And, obviously she was disgruntled. She was upset. She didn't like various different things going on. But the bottom line is, by not securing the scene, not ensuring that weapons were secured, not following protocols with bullets, bringing live ammo on the scene, knowing it was there, I think they proved that she had knowledge it was there on the scene, and not taking every step to ensure that those were secured. I think the state has proven their case. But we're going to hear the defense's case now. We'll hear how they rebut that, how they rebut me, and what I'm feeling on this case. I think we will have a verdict today. I think it will be guilty of count 1, involuntary, and I think at this point it will be not guilty of destruction of evidence. I don't think they're going to deliberate long. I don't think there's a lot to deliberate here. It's just how I feel. Maybe the defense will change my opinion. I guess that's a great place to segue into the courtroom. Let's go into the courtroom and pick up with that. Whoops, wrong courtroom. Sorry. All right. Anyways, let's go into quiet. I realized I'd take myself off. I have it on settle mobile mode. But anyways, I'll leave it there. I showed you the public discussion courtroom. But anyways, let's go into the courtroom here. I'm going to go mobile, and let's start watching the closing arguments. All right, guys. I'll see you in a little bit. I'm going to try to. I'm not going to say that for 100%, but I'm going to make an effort to go live today. And this evening, since it is a closing argument, and we're going to try to go live, have a discussion, and talk about this case and others. Anyways, let's jump in the courtroom.
All right, you may be seated. Mr. Bowles?
Thank you, Your Honor. May I please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I want to start also, as I did when this began, which I want to sincerely thank you for your time and attention and all of your work on this case. It's been hard. It's been a long case, and I want to thank you first. On behalf of Ms. Gutierrez Reed, who this is extremely important for her, this case, and this is her day in court. And it's extremely important that the government rule out every reasonable doubt that there is in this case, because that is our standard in this country. Reasonable doubt is a concept, meaning if you have any reasonable doubt, if you have a reasonable doubt, we cannot convict people in this country. That's how it's set up. Because of that, the burden is on the prosecution, always stays on the prosecution, and so they have to rule out all of the reasonable doubts. In this case, and I'm going to talk about a lot of the evidence soon, but I just want to start with a summary. The prosecutor just presented to you a series of pictures, and those were the pictures they paid the guy $10,000 to enlarge, and they went through the pictures and they tried to show that there were silver primers, and this is going to be definitive evidence that these live rounds had to be on set at a particular time. Let me tell you why there's reasonable doubt, number one, that they will never be able to rule out in this case. Sarah Zachary threw away rounds. She unquestionably threw away rounds after the shooting. It's undisputed. We have no idea what those look like. We will never have an idea what they look like, and that will never be able to be overcome. That one fact alone prevents that entire picture setup that was just shown to you from being accurate, from being real. Because we have no idea what those other rounds, whether they had silver primers, whether they were dummies, whether they were other types of dummies, what they look like. We have no idea. Fact two on the pictures. Seth Kenney told you he had gotten live rounds from Thel Reed that went to the 1883 set. Those live rounds were three types. There were three types of bullets. He then brought back around 125 of those, of the three types. Now, the ones that the state seized, the prosecutors made a point of saying, these don't match the live rounds. However, we don't know what he had because they waited a month to go get them. It was over a month when they searched. And when Mr. Kenney brought in the rounds, he had been talking to the investigator about what was going on in the investigation. So we're never going to have an idea as to what Seth Kenney had and what he provided. Because he also told you in this trial, he had no inventory system. He had no idea what was coming in and going out of his place. The place was a wreck. It looked like a train had hit it. There's no way for somebody to really understand what they're putting in and what they're going out. And so he also said there were things that went onto the Rust set that he hadn't inventoried, hadn't invoiced. He said that there were things that put on there that he didn't have invoiced. So here's the problem with that. We do not know that Seth Kenney only had those patinaed rounds. That's reasonable doubt. That's coming right from the government's witnesses, from Mr. Kenney. That part is unreconcilable. There is a reasonable doubt that will never leave this case on those 2 points, on the pictures and the live rounds. Now, Ms. Morrissey calls it dishonest for us to raise a question about Mr. Kenney. And I submit it's not dishonest at all, because they have the burden to investigate every possibility, every aspect, as anybody in Ms. Gutierrez Reed's place would deserve and would want, because their life is on the line as well on felony charges, and it's the government's duty to rule out all these other things. Far from dishonest, what it is thoroughness, competence, finding what happened with Seth Kenney, taking his fingerprints, taking his DNA, going through and searching earlier, doing that investigation, and finding out if indeed there is another possibility that they ruled out right away and they never wanted to look into because they rushed to judgment on Miss Gutierrez Reed from the very beginning. They singled her out on that set. They put her in a cop car, whether she asked or whether they put her in. She's in the cop car and she never leaves custody until after her statement. They singled her out and they rushed to judgment on her, and that's what you've seen ever since. Miss Morrissey says, and a camera crew, and she mocks things that we raise as possibilities on the idea that none of it can be possible except Miss Gutierrez Reed is guilty. That is the only thing that can be possible because I say it. It's not how it works. Miss Morrissey said she indicted Mr. Baldwin. I indicted Mr. Baldwin. Actually, I think it's the state of New Mexico. That's not an individual person with that power. She also sat there when Miss Zachary was on the stand, and Miss Zachary, I'll remind you, got an immunity agreement. Miss Zachary was promised she would never be prosecuted. And Miss Morrissey stands up and says, there's no evidence against Miss Zachary. Well, then why was she given an immunity agreement? Why would she need immunity if there's nothing against Miss Zachary? She's given an immunity agreement, and then she's told on redirect examination by Miss Morrissey, remember, if you don't tell the truth, I can prosecute you. I will prosecute you. So Miss Zachary doesn't tell the version of the truth that the government believes is true. We saw the threat in live court. You can't trust some of the witness testimony in this case, and that will raise a reasonable doubt as well, I submit, because of things like that. Because the lead investigator admits that she practiced her answers and questions with the prosecutor. That's something you can consider. Are you hearing everything? Or are you hearing a one-sided version that fits the narrative that Miss Gutierrez Reed has to be guilty because we picked her out first and it's got to be her? Can't be Mr. Kinney, can't be anything else, any other possibilities. Sarah Zachary has nothing to do with it. Even though we know unquestionably she threw away rounds after a shooting. That's undoubtedly going to be evidence, but there's nothing on her, apparently. Second, these boxes. The idea that the boxes match. We heard testimony that these rounds were loaded in and out of these boxes daily. Nobody knows what was in them on the 13th, the 16th, the 21st, because the rounds were put in, they were taken out, and they were put in different boxes. So the boxes really don't matter. There's reasonable doubt all over the place to the boxes because we don't know what was in them 3 or 4 days before. It doesn't matter who brought them. The boxes are interesting because the government wants to match up the two and they want to show the pictures that match, yet all the ones from PDQ Props have the same label, same font. They're from Joe Swanson. So those boxes are similar to the ones on set. So that part is not conclusive as well. The other part, when the government shows you video and video and video only on the 13th and says Miss Gutierrez Reed was lax on safety. Well, again, you're seeing videos from short snippets of time on one day on an entire movie set, and then you're not seeing what Miss Gutierrez Reed may have done right after the clip. You're not seeing what might have happened right after that. The other thing that strongly rebuts all of the safety points Ms. Morrissey is pointing out about Ms. Gutierrez Reed is OSHA. Now they try to downplay OSHA, but OSHA is a separate, independent state and federal agency that did a full investigation into the responsibility for safety failures on this set. And you can evaluate the credibility in your minds of Mr. Montoya, who took the stand, and how you thought he testified, whether you thought he was thorough and how he answered questions. He interviewed quite a few people, and he reviewed a lot of information. Their conclusion after that was done was that production was responsible. He said the root cause was production adopted a safety plan and it ended at the word adoption because they didn't do anything after that. They didn't respond to complaints that there were safety concerns. They didn't allow for more training and take the time to do that. They did not respond to the negligent discharges and deal with that. Mr. Halls talked to one of the guys briefly, and that was all that happened. So you got to set that they're not allowing time for inventory for the armor. They're not allowing time for them to clean their weapons or deal with their weapons. This is management. You just heard Mr. Pesh state that the first assistant director is the primary person for safety on that set. Dave Halls has been doing this 30 years. Somebody doing it 30 years has a responsibility and duty to step in when there's safety things going on, and he's on several of those videos. He has a responsibility to step in and say, hey, we're going to stop this. We're going to slow this down. We're going to have meetings. We're going to have additional safety training, and we're going to address this. Ms. Gutierrez Reed, come over here. We're going to do this, and we're going to talk to people. She also can come in and talk about that. And on those videos, they're both on the videos. But OSHA found, because of the lack of support, because she's a part-time armorer, because she's not full-time, because there's not two of her, as Mr. Carpenter said, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. Well, here we didn't even have 1. We had a half. So she's trying to run around and do various things. She's a half a job on a set with over 20 guns, and they want to lay the complete blame on her in this case, as opposed to OSHA, who investigated as an official agency and made an official determination that this was production and management that was responsible. That's important. That's an important finding because they said all of this was caused safety-wise by management. As Mr. Sousa told you, the buck stops with production. The buck stops with production. As in any organization, it starts at the top. You don't go and take one of the lowest people on the call sheet after something bad happens, after the whole management team is just thrown safety aside in favor of money, in favor of speed, in favor of profit. You throw all of that aside because at the end, you've got a convenient fall person. You've got a convenient scapegoat. And she may not be the armorer on some days. She's a props person, but she's certainly the armorer when everything goes bad. You know why? Because despite OSHA's findings that they were responsible, production, the guys that you saw come in, the producers, the big guys, they want to sail off into the sunset and go on about their business, finish the movie, make the money, because they've got the convenient fall person sitting right here. And all that has to happen is everybody has to gang up. Everybody has to have their talks after this happened and blame Hannah. So it has to happen. That's what happened in this case. You had a production company on a shoestring budget, an A-list actor that was really running the show. He was directing people in those clips, telling the camera person where to go, telling the armor where to go. And then you had a situation where at the end they had somebody they could all blame. It didn't work out with OSHA because OSHA didn't buy it. OSHA said it was the higher-ups. So here we are in a criminal court where the government tries to pin all of it on Ms. Gutierrez Reed. And it's just not the truth. It's absolutely right. We do want the truth. We want the truth and all the facts that were found by OSHA to be considered. We wanted all of the facts that you don't have in this courtroom to be considered because that's the only fair way to do it, to resolve all reasonable doubt and to rule it out. If you don't have all the evidence, you can't rule out all of that reasonable doubt. I want to talk about foreseeability, and I want to play this for you. You probably remember that. That was the scene where Mr. Baldwin runs up the hill and cut is yelled. And right after cut is yelled, he shoots. That's, I submit, reasonable doubt, and I'll tell you why. Because Mr. Baldwin went off script. He chose to fire after cut was called. And you're going to see where he does later do the same thing in this tragic shooting. Mamie Mitchell told you on the stand, the script supervisor, that it was not in the script for Mr. Baldwin to point the weapon. It was not in the script for him to point the weapon. And we have to be very careful with facts when we're considering a criminal case and the beyond the reasonable doubt standard. That's extremely important, because Ms. Gutierrez Reed, nor anybody else, knew that Mr. Baldwin in that moment was going to point the weapon right at Halyna and Ms. Hutchins and Mr. Souza and do what he did. That is the concept of foreseeability. Now, Ms. Morrissey gave you an example of if I hand somebody a firearm and it's loaded, and then they go and do something with it, and it hurts somebody. But here, what we had, she did not know Mr. Baldwin was going to do what he did. No one, first of all, called her back into the church that he was using the gun at that time. She had given it to Halls to sit in the church. Mr. Halls then gave it to Mr. Baldwin, and that is the conclusion of the lead investigator. That was what Baldwin said, and that is what Ms. Gutierrez Reed said. So Halls hands it to him. No one calls her back in to let her know Baldwin is doing that blocking scene. She doesn't know that's happening. The medic said she did not hear anybody call that out, first team, over the channel. So that's not getting put out. So Baldwin's doing another audible like he did on this video that you just saw. He's going off script. That defeats any idea that that was foreseeable to Ms. Gutierrez Reed. If she doesn't know what's happening, she can't foresee it. That's a big part of the instruction. The other part I want to talk about foreseeability and where this matters is live rounds. Now, live rounds in this type of situation has not happened in Hollywood. In the 100 years of Hollywood, this has not happened in a situation like we saw in this case. No one on that set foresaw, knew, or thought that live rounds were going to be on that set. No one. You did not hear one witness in this case. Even Ms. Morrissey said there was no evidence that Hannah knew about live rounds coming on, or this was done. There's no evidence of that. Nobody thought live rounds were going to be on set. Mr. Souza told the doctors he couldn't believe it. He argued with them because it was inconceivable that live rounds would appear. Because of that, when you read the jury instructions, there's a concept in the involuntary manslaughter of an element of willful disregard of the rights of another. That word willful, and I'm going to go over it soon, means purposeful. That you willfully do something, you purposefully do something. What's impossible for the government to prove in this case.
Can we approach?
And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk about willful more in a moment when we get there. But it cannot be willful if Hannah does not know there's live rounds. And nobody did. So she did not do something willfully knowing that Baldwin could foreseeably hurt somebody with this firearm because she didn't know it was live. And let me give you an example. it's akin to a nurse, let's say in a hospital, who the pharmacy mislabels a drug. And let's say it comes to her and somebody's ordered it be administered to a patient. She then administers it not knowing that it's a fatal drug of some other type. The pharmacy's mislabeled it. The patient passes. It's the same situation as we have here, where the government would be saying the nurse committed involuntary manslaughter. No, that's not true, because she did not know what happened. It's like a long time ago when the Tylenol capsules were laced with cyanide, way back in the 80s or somewhere around there. There was no prosecution of the pharmacies that didn't know about this, that were tainted by it. It's the same type of situation we have here with the nurse. Miss Gutierrez Reed did not know there were live rounds, and she was entitled to rely on production buying dummies and the boxes labeled dummies. She's entitled to rely on that. And that reliance is reasonable. So she cannot foresee a live round. Now, I want to talk next about Miss Gutierrez Reed's statements to law enforcement. You saw her first statement. She didn't have an attorney. She did waive her rights and answer her question. She had not been advised at that time. Ms. Hutchins had passed. And she came in a second time and answered all questions. The reason why I say that is she was cooperative. She was trying to assist in what this investigation, what they were investigating. Now, Corporal Hancock never fully investigated the source of the live rounds. And she told you that she focused on people on the set. So again, in ruling out reasonable doubt and where those live rounds came from, we have not done that in this case because there was never a full investigation as to the source of the live rounds. Let me give you an example. The state never called Joe Swanson. And it's kind of remarkable because Joe Swanson was the original source of where these came from. He's also the JS on all the boxes. So the idea that the person where it originated, you wouldn't call that person and get some more information is interesting. But more than that, it leaves a huge hole in the origin of the live rounds. Let me tell you what else it did. Seth Kinney's fingerprints and DNA were never taken. Seth Kinney talked to Corporal Hancock 40 times or more. They supplied information back and forth. And he starts making you wonder about what's going on and why I'm called dishonest for raising the possibility that maybe Mr. Kinney was the source. Because he's pretty tight with law enforcement in this case. Obviously. They don't do a prop search warrant until 6 days after the incident, and that was Corporal Hancock and the rest of the sheriffs. They don't search Mr. Kinney's business until over a month after. They never asked the FBI to check live rounds for fingerprints or DNA. And so we will not know if Mr. Kinney's fingerprints or anybody else's would have ever appeared on those live rounds on set because they didn't get that evidence. Bryce Ziegler, I want to tell you a little bit, remind you a little bit about his testimony, and that's Mr. Ziegler. He talked about Baldwin's revolver being single action. You have to cock it, and then every time you want to shoot it. He testified about breaking that firearm. They actually destroyed the firearm after testing that was approved by the sheriff by hitting that with a hammer. He talked about that you can't determine a live round from a picture. And that's the other point I think is important to consider when considering the picture analysis. Now, the Latin print examiner, examined various things, but she did not examine anything Seth Kinney-wise. There's no analysis on the cartridges from the prop cart, and found 8 FBI employee prints. Mr. Gillette, on the powder testing. Only tested 11 rounds from Seth Kenney. Again, we know that he brought back 125 from the group that went to 1883. And I also want to remind you about 1883, some of those were Starline brass rounds. And some of those, he said, had silver primers. So when we get to the set, the live rounds are Starline brass, and they have silver primers. It's a continuous chain that could have been traced from Del Reed all the way to Seth Kenney, all the way back to the set. But they did not do that thorough investigation, and that's reasonable doubt they have not ruled out. The dummies, again, I submit this is another area of reasonable doubt. Witnesses testified this set contained a dangerous mix of dummies. They were dangerous because it was impossible for the armor and prop master to hear and rattle all of the dummies, especially under pressure, rushing, and noise on the set. You saw there was a lot of wind that day on the lapel. There's people running around. There's, I think at one point somebody said 200 people. There's all kinds of things going on. And despite that, Mr. Haig indicated in a quiet office he could not hear one of the dummies when it's rattled. That's dangerous because when you're trying to do it quickly, when there's a lot of noise, it may be a dummy, it may not. You can't hear it rattle. Seth Kenney, again, mentioned in this case that he always rattle tested his rounds, and he made sure they're dummies. He told you all that. Well, the problem, even the box that they say was Seth Kenney's and the rounds that came out of it, there was one round, if you remember, that was gunked, and it didn't shake. That round had to be sent to the FBI to be broken apart and to be checked to see if it was live. So if he truly is that thorough in shaking, he missed that round. Now the producers, they had oversight over the budget team. They didn't know where the funds were set aside for the armor. They were on location for filming, and they were fined the statutory maximum by OSHA for managerial safety violations. Again, OSHA found that the management team are the ones responsible, and yet we're here with Ms. Gutierrez Reed, the person on trial for the felony offenses. Sherilyn Schaefer was the medic on set. You recall she did not have chest seals. She, I think, was doing the best she could with the equipment that she had, but she didn't have the complete equipment to deal with a gunshot wound. She also indicated she never heard anyone call out use of a gun before the fatal shooting. Mamie Mitchell, I touched on this earlier. Most important thing Ms. Mitchell said was that it was not in the script for Baldwin to point the firearm. That goes directly to the element when you read the jury instructions and you all go back in to deliberate. That goes to foreseeability. And whether or not anybody can foresee the moments Mr. Baldwin pointing the gun, using it as a pointer, he's up on the hill shooting after cut, and then he's shooting, pointing the gun when he's not supposed to in scenes. David Halls was the first assistant director, as you remember, and he was in charge of overall safety. Now, he got a misdemeanor, 6 months unsupervised probation, even though he was in charge of overall set safety. He never raised any concerns, and in fact, I think he said Hannah did a great job as armor. He indicated he did not hand the gun to Baldwin, but the sheriff contradicted this, so did Hannah, and so did Mr. Baldwin. And that was essentially Mr. Hall's testimony. Sarah Zachary, I remind you, she threw away rounds on set after the shooting, took items off the prop card. Now, she worked for Seth Kenney, and she texted and called him right after the shooting. One of her texts, she indicated she had said she was talking to Alec Baldwin and trying to keep her facts straight. She mentioned that she had loaded firearms on set. She picked up ammunition from Kenney at PDQ. I'll remind you in the testimony that Sarah Zachary and Hannah Gutierrez Reed went to Kenney's place before production started, and he had given them ammunition, leathers, and firearms. So again, we don't know exactly what Mr. Kenny may have supplied to this set because it's not inventoried, it's not all invoiced. I also remind you about Sarah Zachary when you're considering her credibility and her testimony. She had the text where she wanted Hannah to go to jail, and she's given complete immunity. Seth Kenny, again, I mentioned this, he supplied the leathers, guns, and ammo before arrest began. He had no inventory system. And we attached some pictures to the right that you can look at in the jury room about his place. It was an absolute mess. There was stored live ammo in the bathroom. And one of the things I think was important to remind you of is he actually called Joe Swanson and had a conversation with him. And after he gets off the call, his first words are, shit, shit, shit. And so that's something as an investigator you would think after he does that, maybe I should call Joe Swanson and see what's happening. See what that means. That reasonable doubt has not been ruled out. I went over this on the 1883 set, and he brought 125 rounds back. Mr. Carpenter, I want to remind you, he was the state's expert armorer. One of the most important points he said was 2 is 1 and 1 is none. And here we didn't have a properly staffed armorer component to the set. Luke Haig, he said the live rounds on set were reloads. He could not hear the dummy rattle in the quiet office, and he said Mr. Baldwin violated basic safety rules. Karen Kuhn, you may remember, was the photographer. She said the armorer was checking guns before when she was present. And she also made a comment about Mr. Baldwin, that on the day she was taking questions, I believe she said on the 21st, he told her to get out of his personal space and said something in a manner that kind of goes along with how he was on the set. Mr. Souza was kind about it. He said he had a strong personality, but you can see it in the videos, and you can see how Mr. Baldwin was acting. Rebecca Smith, I want to talk about the tampering. She said that she hadn't used cocaine in 31 years. She saw a baggie inside a baggie for approximately 5 seconds. She didn't know if it was cocaine or meth or something else. Now, she admitted at the end she was guessing. And we also know that the substance in the baggie was never tested. And so the only evidence you have of narcotics in this case is a guess. Now, Ms. Morrissey in her closing indicated that, well, of course we don't have the evidence. The whole thing is throwing it away. Well, you have to prove first that it was evidence. So in a normal tampering case, when, let's say, a firearm's thrown away, and we know a firearm was used, and somebody throws a firearm away, we know that was a firearm. So we know that would be evidence in a case involving a shooting. Here, we have an unknown substance. Again, they have to rule out all of the reasonable doubt by that. It's not enough to say it's probably something under a criminal standard. It's probably cocaine in that bag because Ms. Smith says it is. If it even happened, we don't even know this happened. The government hasn't established that except through her testimony. We don't know if there was a bag. We don't know if this actually was passed. And that's their burden. Let's say it did happen, that you believe it did happen. It's not enough to say what was probably in that bag. They have the burden to rule it out beyond a reasonable doubt that it couldn't have been anything else. And she's already calling it in her testimony potentially multiple substances, cocaine, methamphetamine, or possibly something else. So she's not even certain about what it is. Without a test, without something presumptive to tell you on a test, there's no way of telling what was in that bag. And it's not enough in a criminal case. OSHA we talked about in detail, and I just want to remind you the root cause they found, they attributed all the responsibility for safety issues to management. Mr. Elliott, he was a defense expert investigator. He got an extensive law enforcement experience, if you recall, in APD and military. One of his big points was Mr. Baldwin was not segregated at the beginning, even though he was the known shooter. Hannah was segregated right away. Again, they zeroed in on her in the rush to have her identified. He indicated there was 20 or so key witnesses not identified and segregated. And the problem with that is they can get their stories together and they can change their stories. They can have their memories altered. We know this happened in this case because after the incident, Mr. Baldwin is talking to Sarah Zachary. He's texting and talking to her. Seth Kinney's talking to Sarah Zachary. Mr. Halls is talking to Baldwin after. And so we don't have all the information they're talking about, but we do know they're coordinating, they're talking. The only one not in that group was Hannah. And again, this was the idea. We've got to circle the wagons, and we've got to pick out the person that's going to take the fall for everything that's happened here. That's Hannah. That's who they got. Law enforcement failed to follow up on the origin of the live rounds, and their delayed search warrants caused problems with missing evidence. P.J. Pesh testified just this morning. He had said, like everybody else, he's never seen in 35 years an armor split duties with props. It's not possible for one person to keep track of so many firearms. And he indicated it's important to give the armor adequate time and resources, which OSHA said as well. She was not given that to do her job. I want to talk to you about the law that the judge instructed you on, and that is the law. What the judge told you about is what we have to follow in terms of evaluating this. The law presumes the defendant to be innocent. The burden is always on the state to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon reason and common sense. The kind of doubt that would make a reasonable person hesitate to act in the graver and more important affairs of life. A doubt based on reason and common sense. So what the government has to do is rule out every reasonable doubt you may have based on reason and common sense. Or in this country, we don't convict people. That's the standard. And again, I go back to where I started at the beginning. If they didn't rule out the reasonable doubt on Miss Zachary throwing away the rounds, that is always going to be there. Because their theory based on you can identify these pictures and we know exactly what was on the set and what remained on the set, we will never know that because some of them were thrown away. And we didn't get all of Seth Kinney's rounds. We're never going to know that. Other areas of reasonable doubt, I've gone over the top two, top three. The prop cart was tampered with. We know that right after the incident, another individual moved it. Now, Lieutenant Benavides said he had eyes on the entire time. But if you saw that video, you can make up your mind what you believe. Ladies and gentlemen, his camera appeared to be pointed right into the vehicle, and the individual getting the cart was way off in the other direction. He said he had his head turned. But you all can decide what you think about that. The prop cart, there was unquestionably items taken from it. We don't know exactly what those are. That is another area of reasonable doubt that the government has not ruled out. You've had witnesses say throughout the trial you can't tell live ammo from a picture. And the reason is that the FBI said it has to be disassembled and you have to open it up because there's powder in it. If there's not powder in it, then it's not live. OSHA stated the root cause of all safety failures was management. OMI ruled this to be an accident, not a homicide. You heard evidence about the esophageal intubation was ineffective to provide oxygen to Halyna. This also was a situation in this case where multiple lawsuits have been filed, and you can evaluate their testimony, those people who have filed lawsuits, with care and caution, because they've got an interest potentially in what's happening in this case by being involved in lawsuits. Involuntary manslaughter, you're going to have that instruction when you go back. That is the charge that Her Honor has read to you. She's given you the law on this. I want to focus you on a couple key points. The government has the burden to show each of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt. The elements are the numbered items. What that means is, if you all have reasonable doubts on any of these elements, Hannah cannot be convicted. And I want to focus you in on element 3, that Hannah acted with a willful disregard. Again, you go back to willful disregard, the nurse example, and the idea that if somebody doesn't know, I mean, that could be the same thing with a nurse on trial for involuntary manslaughter, but if she doesn't know the drug was mislabeled, you cannot hold her criminally accountable for something like that. It's the same thing in this case, because no one knew there were live rounds. So she did not act willfully in anything that happened that day. In loading the firearm, this was another day everybody thought on set. Loading the firearms, running to different things, doing the duties. Nobody's calling her back in for the blocking scene. Mr. Baldwin's doing something on his own. Nobody in the wildest dreams thought there was a live round. And because of that, the next element is that Hannah Gutierrez Reed Act caused the death. I submit to you that what caused her to pass was Mr. Baldwin going off script and pointing the weapon. Now, he didn't know there was a live round in there either. He didn't know. Again, he's in the same position that nobody knew there was ever going to be a live round on that set. But the only ultimate act is pointing of that weapon. Miss Gutierrez wasn't in the church. She didn't point that weapon. She didn't pull it. Nobody called her back in. And because of that, those two elements, I submit to you, have not been proven on involuntary manslaughter. And they have to be. The government has to resolve all your reasonable doubts about that, or we cannot convict. Mental state and willful disregard, and that is going to be in your instructions. For you to find the defendant acted negligently in this case, you must find that the defendant acted with willful disregard. And so again, that's the terminology, is willful disregard. You're also going to be instructed, the court instructed you, Her Honor, on negligent use of a firearm. And that is a lesser included offense of the involuntary manslaughter. So when you go back and deliberate, you will have this in front of you as well, whether Miss Gutierrez Reed endangered the safety of another by handling or using a firearm in a negligent manner. And again, the language is acted with willful disregard. That's what has to be proven under that charge for you to resolve all of your reasonable doubts. Tampering with evidence, I think this is a real stretch, and it is a real stretch. And you talk about guessing. This one, they have to prove the defendant hid a bag of cocaine. Well, the only witness they have to it said it was either cocaine or meth or something else. So just by the testimony alone, the beginning of that, there's no way of knowing it was a bag of cocaine. It's just impossible. There has to be reasonable doubt on that by the government's own witness. Their only witness. No law enforcement testing, there's nobody else. This is absolutely unproven in this case. And you don't even have to get to element 2, because element 1 is not even close to having been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Proximate cause, it's a legal term, but it's something the government has to prove as well. And this is where you get into that the passing was a foreseeable result of Hannah Gutierrez's act. The act was a significant cause of the death, and the language I want to focus you in on, in a natural and continuous chain of events uninterrupted by an outside event. What these mean, and these are the legal terminology, what it means is that what Hannah Gutierrez did had to be a foreseeable result. But again, that caused her death. But again, without her knowing that there was a live round, that's impossible to meet that standard. She did not have that knowledge, and there's no witness that came in here in this courtroom in 2 weeks to say she had that knowledge. Without it, nothing she did, she has that willful disregard because she just doesn't know. Now, was there an outside event as well? There was an outside event. There's 2 outside events. Whoever put the live round on set, and then Mr. Baldwin in the end going off script and doing what he did. Those are outside events outside of Miss Gutierrez Reed's control that she didn't know was going to happen. That breaks any idea, and there's reasonable doubt that she had anything to do ultimately with Halyna Hutchins' death. Miss Gutierrez Reed was not a significant cause as a result of her death because of the reasons I've mentioned to you. Another instruction Her Honor gave you is that negligence of a third person, again I'm going to highlight the language, if it breaks the foreseeable chain of events. Again, the foreseeable chain of events on that set is you have dummy rounds, you have blank rounds, and then you have an orderly progression with how those are being used. Here we had a completely unforeseeable live round, 6 live rounds that were on set, nobody could foresee. And then we have Mr. Baldwin's action in the end. Those were both unforeseeable to Miss Gutierrez Reed. The judge instructed you on, you all are the sole judge of the facts. You all are deciding the facts, ladies and gentlemen. And your verdict should not be based on speculation, guess, or conjecture. It goes back to the tampering charge. It goes back to some of the other aspects the government has told you. In this country, we can't decide and convict people on guesses. And that's a lot of what they've asked you to do in several areas, to guess, to assume, to speculate. It's not sufficient to convict people in this country to guess. It's not. And that's what they brought you and they've asked you to do on the tampering and other aspects of their charges. And that's not sufficient. Ladies and gentlemen, Hannah is not guilty on all the counts because of the law that Her Honor has given you. When you apply that law and you apply the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, she could not anticipate what Baldwin would do. It was not in the script. It was not foreseeable. Management was responsible for safety failures and not Hannah. There's 0 evidence of cocaine. There's no testing. And again, I go back to the idea that Hannah is a scapegoat for all the management failures. They do hope she gets convicted, so they're all exonerated. They can move forward. They can finish that movie like Mr. Sousa said they did and make their money. But as he also told you, the buck always stops with production, and it's their responsibility. In any organization, it goes from the top down. And that's where the responsibility lies in this case. That's what OSHA said. And that's also the truth. And the truth is important, because justice for Halyna does not mean injustice for Hannah. Does not mean injustice for Hannah. It does not mean they get to steamroll her and they get to come in and spin their version of facts and they get to call it truth. Because that's not truth. Truth is bringing you, ladies and gentlemen, everything they can. Justice is bringing you everything they can. Justice is not mocking theories that could come true, that might have been the case. Justice is not laughing in court during some of our exchanges. And you can evaluate that as to their credibility, whether that was professional, whether if she didn't take court seriously, did she take the investigation seriously? I submit she did not. And so they can't come in here with a straight face and mock us and criticize us and tell you they have given you enough to convict her behind a reasonable doubt, because they haven't. Thank you.
State's reply.
I'll begin while the gentlemen are setting up the Elmo for me. Hannah didn't know there was a live round on set. I agree. If Hannah knew there was a live round on set and she loaded it into a prop gun and it was used to kill Halyna Hutchins, she wouldn't be charged with involuntary manslaughter. She'd be charged with second-degree murder. She'd be charged with first-degree depraved mind murder. This is an involuntary manslaughter charge because she didn't know there were live rounds on set, and the reason she didn't know was through her own negligence, her own recklessness, her own willful disregard for the safety of other people. That willful disregard, that lack of care for the safety of other people that you have seen throughout this trial, it is shocking. For Mr. Bowles to come up to this podium and say it wasn't foreseeable that Alec Baldwin was going to go off script and pull the hammer and pull the trigger. He showed you a video of Alec Baldwin going off script. Alec Baldwin went off script. Hannah Gutierrez knew it. She was there. Hannah Gutierrez knew that Baldwin was loose. She knew it. She didn't do anything about it, even though it was her job. It was her job. It is her job to say to an A-list actor, if in fact that's what you want to call him, hey, you can't behave that way with those firearms. That is her job. That is what they pay her for. That is the job that she applied for. That is the job that she accepted. Foreseeability. You want to talk about off script? Just remember those videos of the stuntman. That's not within the script. She was there. She watched it. She knew these people would go off script. You know she didn't check the rounds. If she checked the rounds, they wouldn't have been floating around that movie set the entire time, undetected. Give you everything we've got. You have absolutely everything we have. This law enforcement team and this team of prosecutors have reviewed thousands and thousands and thousands of photos and thousands of videos. We have interviewed countless people, many of whom you didn't even hear from. We can't stay here forever. You have absolutely everything you need. One of the amazingly shocking things about this case to me has always been, and it's to Detective Hancock's credit, a defense attorney with his own agenda, no question, comes to her and says, it's Seth Kenney, it's Seth Kenney, it's Seth Kenney. That's his job. Okay? Let's make that clear. That's Mr. Bowles' job. He gets Hannah's dad to say, it's Seth Kenney, it's Seth Kenney, it's Seth Kenney. Rather than ignore them, she gets a search warrant. She took his speculative agenda, presented it to a judge, got a search warrant, and searched that man's property. And oh my heavens, what did they find? They found exactly what Thel Reed said they would find. They found live ammunition with semi-wad cutter projectiles. You have everything you have. You have everything we have. You have everything you will ever need to convict her. This is 100% foreseeable. Hannah Gutierrez is not a scapegoat. Hannah Gutierrez is not being treated as a scapegoat. Mr. Halls was charged criminally. To his credit, he took an early plea and he got the benefit of that. Mr. Baldwin has now been indicted. Everyone with criminal culpability has been criminally charged in this case. She's not being scapegoated. She is being treated like everyone else. She is not being given a break because she's a woman. She is not being given a break because she's young. Because that's not how the law works. Let me just review my notes real quick, and as I promised you, I am going to try to speed this up for you. Please keep in mind, Mr. Bowles comes up to the podium and says Sarah Zachary threw rounds away. She did. Obviously she did. She admitted it. She told law enforcement that she did it. And rather than try to prosecute her for tampering with evidence, for panicking and throwing some rounds away, she agreed to come in and testify, and her agreement is that she must testify truthfully. And she testified truthfully. You want to know why we don't have an inertia puller in evidence? Why we don't have a box of dummies that Ms. Gutierrez said she brought on set? She said she brought 2 boxes. We've only got 1. You want to know why? Because she went to the prop truck on October 23rd, got access to it, took a bunch of gun belts, and a couple of boxes.
Your Honor, I want to object.
Where were we? She took stuff out of the prop truck. She took gun belts. You heard from Sarah Zachary that those were gun belts that she brought from another movie set that were already loaded with dummy rounds. Who knows what was in them? So I want to make sure that we understand what reasonable doubt means. Reasonable doubt means the doubt must be reasonable. It is not a reasonable doubt to cast suspicion on Brian Norvell. It is not a reasonable doubt to cast suspicion on Seth Kenney. All investigative leads were exhausted. He simply didn't do anything wrong. You want to talk about scapegoating? That's the guy that got scapegoated. The doubt must be reasonable. And I don't have to prove this case beyond all possible doubt. If that is what the law required, my heavens, we live in a world of infinite possibilities. The government would never be able to prove a case beyond all possible doubt. We'd have to have a video of absolutely everything that took place. It's not the standard, and it doesn't have to be the standard. So when you're back there and you're talking about doubt, make sure it's a reasonable one under this set of circumstances. You know, Mr. Bowles says to you, these production outfitters were just from one day. That's right. All that happened in one day. Imagine what all the other days were like. That was one day. Mr. Bowles is right. The crew didn't believe there were live rounds on set. They believed that she was going to do her job. They believed that she did her job. This isn't Seth Kenney's responsibility to inventory rounds, although he did it. That wasn't his responsibility. Rust Productions didn't provide all of the dummy rounds to the set of this movie. You know from her own statements she brought 2 boxes on herself. We're not living in an alternate reality. All right. Let's go through these. I'll go through them relatively quickly. When you all go back into the jury deliberation room, you will have your own copy. So you certainly will have a copy to reference. These are some of the instructions that are important to us. Your verdict should not be based on sympathy or prejudice. Sympathy or prejudice? Huh?
It's not showing on the screen.
Oh. Oh, I see. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. So it can't be based on sympathy or prejudice. And for any of you who are feeling sympathetic because she is young and she is maybe inexperienced, although by her own statement to Detective Hancock, she would tell you she wasn't. You all are on this jury because during voir dire you agreed to follow the law. And I will ask you to do it right now. If you had said during voir dire, I can't follow the law, I feel too sympathetic, you wouldn't be here. And if you can't follow the law, you can probably excuse yourselves. I'm going to skip that one. That's an easy one. You must not concern yourselves with the consequences of your verdict. That is the law. That is the law that you agreed to follow. That is the law that you are required to follow. Hannah Gutierrez endangered the safety of another by handling or using a firearm in a negligent manner. There can be absolutely no doubt. That happened. Hannah Gutierrez should have known of the danger involved by her actions. Yeah, she knew. This was completely foreseeable. She was trained in firearms. She knows what we all know. Guns can kill you. You gotta be really careful. Her act caused the death of Halyna Hutchins. 12A is the alternative theory. And so let me explain to you that 12 and 12A are alternatives. You must make a decision about guilt or innocence unanimously to the count, not to the alternatives. So 6 of you can say, I think she's guilty of 12, but not 12A. Another 6 of you can say, we think she's guilty of 12A, but not 12. Done. You're done. Hannah Gutierrez loaded live ammunition into a firearm. Yes, she certainly did. She told the police she did. She failed to perform an adequate safety check of the ammunition. Of course, you know that. She didn't do it just once. She did it numerous times. She acted with willful disregard for the safety of others, without question. So you are being presented with what's called a lesser included offense. And I will remind you the instructions that the judge read you at the beginning. Your first job is to see if you can agree on involuntary manslaughter. If you find her guilty of involuntary manslaughter on either alternative, you do not move on to this misdemeanor. It's done. If you find her not guilty of involuntary manslaughter, then you get to move on to the misdemeanor. You've heard a lot about that. I'll skip it. This is what we call a general criminal intent instruction, and I want to just make sure that you understand this instruction only applies to the tampering with evidence. It does not apply to the involuntary manslaughter because she is charged with negligent homicide, not intentional. Very importantly are the proximate cause jury instructions. These jury instructions are what allows you to find Ms. Gutierrez guilty, even though Mr. Baldwin may have also been a significant cause of the death of Halyna Hutchins. So let's go through it. The death was a foreseeable result of Hannah Gutierrez placing a live round into a firearm. Of course it was. The act of the defendant was a significant cause of the death of Halyna Hutchins. The defendant's act was a significant cause of death if it was an act which, in a natural and continuous chain of events, uninterrupted by an outside event, resulted in the death, and without which the death would not have occurred. She brought a bunch of live rounds on set, accidentally, but negligently. She loaded one of them into a prop gun, and this was after they were loaded into Jensen Ackles' gun belt and Alec Baldwin's holster. And she told Dave Halls, this is a cold gun. He told the crew, it's a cold gun. At that point, everyone certainly assumed that there wasn't a live round. She knew Baldwin would go off script. She didn't have prop duties to tend to. She walked out. And even if she had been there, it wouldn't have made a difference because you have seen the incredible lack of control that she exercised as the only person on the movie set in charge of firearms. There is no intervening event. If you think the intervening event is that Baldwin manipulated the gun, that's the whole purpose of the prop. He's going to manipulate it. You saw a bunch of other actors do it. Very importantly, there may be more than one significant cause of death. If the acts of two or more persons significantly contribute to the cause of death, each act is a significant cause of death. If you think Baldwin's act was a significant cause of death, that's okay. You can still convict her. Jury instruction 20. If you find the negligence of a person other than the defendant was the only significant cause of death, or constitutes an intervening cause that breaks the foreseeable chain of events, the defendant is not guilty. Well, that's not this case. She brought the live rounds on set. She put a live round in a prop gun. That's the reason that Ms. Hutchins is dead. One of at least two reasons. I will again thank you very much for your time and for your attention. I know that this has been hard work for you folks. I will ask you to find Ms. Gutierrez guilty of involuntary manslaughter and tampering with evidence. And I will ask you to bring some justice to Halyna Hutchins. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Instruction number 22. I will now ask you to retire to the jury room to begin your deliberations. You will be provided a copy of the jury instructions, and the exhibits introduced as evidence will be made available to you. Prior to beginning your deliberations, you will need to select one of you to act as foreperson. That person will preside over your deliberations and will speak for the jury here in court. Forms of verdict have been prepared for your use. You will take these forms to the jury room. When you have reached a unanimous agreement as to your verdict, the foreperson will sign the forms which express your verdict. You will then return all forms of verdict, these instructions, and any exhibits to the courtroom. There are 12 that deliberate. There are 4 alternates on this jury, given the long length of this jury. Keeping with the privacy, I'm going to pass this instruction down with the help of Ryan. You're going to look if this is one of your names, and you are one of the alternates. What I'm going to ask the bailiffs to do is to first take the alternates out so they can get their belongings, and I'm going to ask you to meet me down at the end of the hallway to explain. I hate to tell alternates they're alternates because they've been paying so close to the evidence, and so just to talk with you, and then and thank you, and then right along on your clip will be the jurors themselves, okay, and the jurors will go into the room, so I'll need the aid of both of them. But first, let me pass this piece of paper over to you. Look down here. There's 4 names. See if one of them is yours and you're an alternate. It's at the bottom. All right, so follow, the alternates follow Ryan. I'll meet you down at the end of the hallway after you get your belongings, and then you'll follow with the jury. George.
All rise.
All right, we're in recess. I'll be back in, but we're in recess. You can get going with your exhibits and things like that.
Hey everybody, Law and Crime's Jesse Weber here. Thank you so much for watching our coverage of the Rust trial of Hannah Gutierrez Reed. You know, this case makes me think about how people get hurt in all kinds of situations that should not happen. And if you do get injured, it is so important to know your rights and whether you should be compensated. That's why I want to highlight the official sponsor of this week's live trial coverage, Morgan & Morgan. They are actually the largest injury law firm in the whole country. And if you're going to take on big insurance companies that often lowball insurance offers in these cases, you need a big firm that's willing to fight. I mean, in the past couple of months, Morgan & Morgan saw verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $6.8 million in New York, and $26 million in Philadelphia. Now, mind you, these are all considerably higher than the highest insurance offers for these accidents. But what also makes Morgan & Morgan so special is that they have completely modernized the process for their clients. They make it super easy because you submit your claim, you upload documents, you talk to your whole legal team, all on your smartphone. That's it. You can see if you have a case in just a few minutes. And in terms of price, you only pay them if you win. There's no upfront fee. Maybe it's not that surprising that 3 million people call them every year. So if you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. You can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less without even having to leave your couch. To start your claim, visit forthepeople.com/lawandcrimelive. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to our live show. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. So we are coming to the end of the Hannah Gutierrez Reed trial out of New Mexico. Closing arguments happened today. The jury began their deliberations at around 3:19 p.m. Eastern time. I don't suspect that they're going to come back any minute, but who knows? Who knows? I've been surprised before. Now, this jury is 7 men, 5 women. And this, of course, is the trial of the former armorer who's been facing involuntary manslaughter charges and a tampering with evidence charge, all connection with the death of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. Now, we know that on October 21st, 2021, a live round was discharged from a prop gun that was being handled by actor and producer on the film, Alec Baldwin. He is facing his own involuntary manslaughter charges. He got himself in trouble when he previously and famously said he didn't pull the trigger, but forensics and ballistics testing indicated that it would have been impossible for the gun to go off in those circumstances without pulling the trigger. He's facing a separate trial in July. We plan to cover it here on Law and Crime. Now, I want to get more into what's happening here, and I'm going to get more into the substance of this case. But before I do that, my main question is, what do you guys think? After everything that has been presented by the prosecution and the defense, and you heard the closings today, do you think Hannah Gutierrez is at fault? Do you think she is criminally responsible? Do you think the jury will find her guilty? What about Alec Baldwin? I tell you right now, I'm planning on doing a show about all of the incriminating evidence that came out against him during the course of this trial, because this case has a lot of intricate details, witnesses, and I'm curious to hear what all of you think. So, you can share your thoughts and comments in the live chat that we have up right now. I'm going to be taking your questions, addressing your opinions from there, but also make sure that your message is noticed and doesn't get lost in the mix. You can send a super chat our way. That's the best way to get your get your question noticed. We're going to get it right up there. So super chat's really the best way to get your message up there. All right. So as we go through this, I want to talk a little bit more about the case. So the prosecution here has 2 alternative theories of involuntary manslaughter here. The first is that Hannah Gutierrez Reed endangered the safety of another by handling the gun in a negligent manner, that she should have known the danger that she was creating, that she acted with a willful disregard for the safety of others, and that, of course, she was a substantial cause of Halyna's death. Not the only cause. We know Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger, but a substantial cause. That is one theory by which the jury could find her guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The other theory is if the jury says, okay, she loaded the live ammunition into that firearm, or she failed to perform an adequate safety check. And that is so important, that she should have known the danger of what she was doing. Again, she acted with willful disregard. So even if the jury is undecided as to whether she handed the weapon over directly to Alec Baldwin herself, there's been some debate and conflicting accounts about that. And even if the jury doesn't believe she loaded the live ammunition, but that she failed to do the proper safety check, she could be found guilty. This gives the prosecution a lot of leeway, a lot of room for the jury to convict her. They still have to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. And look, we're going to have a sidebar coming out tonight about the most damning pieces of evidence in this case against her. But on the face of it, look, when a live round is fired from a gun and kills someone, on its face, you have to say the armorer is the one who's responsible for the guns and the ammunition on set. Unless you can show that there was some sort of sabotage, that someone loaded the gun with a live round when she wasn't looking, or that she, after she handed the gun over, it puts Hannah Gutierrez Reed in a very, very tough position. It also didn't help that much that the live round didn't appear to come from the ammunition supplier, Seth Kenny. Testimony was suggesting that the live rounds found on that set didn't even look like the live ammunition that he had in his company. And the evidence was that the defendant kept a sloppy prop cart, that there were live rounds on there, that she had taken ammunition from another movie set, left it in her car for 2 weeks, then brought it onto the Rust set. So it's definitely creating the impression that she brought the live ammunition onto the set. Now, prosecutors don't have to prove that, but if the jury believes that she brought the live ammunition on the set, that is really, really bad for her. Now, I would say some of the strongest and most damning evidence against her was from this firearms expert named Brian Carpenter. He was shown all of this footage from the Rust set where he sees actors improperly holding the guns, pointing it in the wrong direction, including Alec Baldwin. Videos of Gutierrez Reed not holding the gun right herself. And it doesn't stop. And she doesn't stop. She doesn't intervene. She doesn't do what she needs to do. And that's the problem. That's the problem. She is supposed to be the last line of defense. She has to ensure that these things don't happen. It's the prosecution side. Now, the defense will say, well, she was young, she was inexperienced, female armor. Can she really be expected to stand up to Alec Baldwin, who's rushing this production along? The prosecution would say yes. Doesn't mean the jury will agree. Jurors are human beings. There's a human aspect to that. There's an empathy element to that. But in terms of strictly the legal professional armor duties, there has been consistent testimony that she should have slowed things down, especially if you see Alec Baldwin wasn't paying attention during the training sessions. You should have been more careful, keep a more careful eye on him. And why is all of this important? Because from the accidental discharges to actors pointing weapons at people to the sloppy ammunition all over the place, the prosecution is trying to show that the shooting of Halyna Hutchins was foreseeable, that Hannah Gutierrez Reed should have known what she was doing, and that this could have resulted in a tragic accident like this. Then there's the evidence tampering charge, that she tried to get another crew member to dispose of a bag of cocaine. The idea here was that she knew she was in trouble with the shooting, that there would have been evidence that she had been doing drugs, investigators coming in, she wanted to get rid of evidence. And that crew member testified to being handed that baggie. Not entirely clear what the baggie was because she got rid of it. She was a recovering addict herself. Okay, so that's the prosecution. And we'll get to more of your questions in a second. But for the defense, they had a very interesting day yesterday because they focused their evidence on an OSHA report that suggested these series of failures was the fault of management, the producers, that Gutierrez Reed couldn't be expected to do what she needed to do. She wasn't given the resources or the time or the opportunity to do what she needed to do because she was working two jobs. She was the armorer, she was working for the props. And an OSHA investigator testified that Gutierrez Reed had no authority to make decisions on gun safety training. Now, prosecutors tried to get that OSHA report tossed. They didn't even want the jury to hear about it. Didn't work. And that now conflicts with the prosecution because they have a witness, Gabrielle Pickle, a line producer, who said she did give the defendant more armor a day. She was given everything she asked for. Then again, does it take away that maybe she didn't do the proper check on the gun? Did she do the appropriate rattle? She wasn't pulled out of the church to do prop stuff, but armor stuff. And they also called the witness to suggest, the defense did, that the investigation itself was tainted. You had witnesses who weren't segregated. So were they coordinating their stories? I don't know. Alec Baldwin's phone wasn't taken away immediately. How can we be sure of what exactly happened? And speaking of Baldwin, the defense will say he was an unforeseeable event. He went off script by doing what he did with the gun that day. He chose to fire it. So it can't be that she willfully disregarded the safety when she didn't know about the live round. Fascinating case here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the law a little bit later on. And remember, they could find her guilty of involuntary manslaughter, or they could find her guilty of a lesser charge, negligent use of a firearm. And so they have a couple options here, or they could find her not guilty. So we're going to take a handful of your questions from the chat. Before we do, I want to run a poll. So if Hannah Gutierrez Reed is found guilty, do you think Alec Baldwin will meet the same fate? Yes, no, not sure. Again, that Alec Baldwin allegedly handled the firearm, but Hannah Gutierrez Reed is accused of loading the weapon with the live round. I'm interested to hear your opinion. I'm sure he's watching this trial. We know you are, so we'll come back to that poll a little bit later. Let's take some of your questions right now. Okay, we have a super chat. It was Hannah's job to keep firearms safe. Guilty. So there you have it. Look, I'm of the position too, and thanks so much for the super chat. Here's the thing. The way that I look at it is you could say someone sabotaged, right? You could say that someone put a live round in there. You could say that, she didn't know. But the fact that she was the last line of defense, and you had expert testimony saying that you had to slow things down. It was her job. An armorer's job is to make sure that these accidents don't happen. Why do you do the safety check? To make sure that there's no live rounds in the weapon. That's why. So I hear the defense's argument, and it's a good argument given these facts. But at the same time, I have to agree with you, Sarah. I really, I could see a conviction here. I really could. All right, we're going to get to more of your super chats in a second. Actually, let me just give a little highlight. We got some super chats with no question, just people who sent in super chats. Really appreciate it. I'm being haunted, 101. That's so kind of you. I hope that this haunting situation ends. I hope it's not too serious. And we also have Miss Urbex's Ghosts. I don't know if you guys are connected, but hopefully you can communicate. One's being haunted, one's ghost. But thank you so much for the super chat questions. Really appreciate it. All right, we have our first guest. We have our first guest with us. We have with us Steve Wolf, film industry armor, to talk about this. Steve, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. I don't appreciate that you have a better background than me, but that's okay. That's totally fine.
No, you can talk to your scenic design folks, and they'll come up with something for you.
Oh, we're working on it. We're working on it. So, Steve, great to have you on. Talk to me about what you think so far. We've come to the end of this case. I kind of gave a little bit of my 2 cents. I really feel that it will be difficult for the defense here, given the responsibilities of an armor on this set.
Exactly. The armor is the last line of defense, and the buck stops there. So, the reason there was live ammo on the set is because of entropy. It's because live ammo exists, and stuff gets spread out. You have to expect that there's going to be live ammo wherever you might be, and that's why when you load the gun, you start, you clear it, you make sure there's nothing in there. So you're starting blank. You actually have to look down each cylinder, not make sure there's not residue from something else down there, and then you check each round. You take the round and you shake it, you listen to it, you hear the BBs in there, it's not a live round. You look for the holes drilled in the side, and then you load them. And then, it's not that hard. It's real serious negligence that wasn't done because it's not rocket surgery.
And look, she was on interrogation tape saying she checked the dummy rounds most of the time. Not the best thing to say most of the time. I was curious, though.
Like saying I break at red lights most of the time.
Yeah. It's a problem when you're dealing with a case of a live round being put into a movie prop and ends up going off. Right. Let me ask you this. There was a big bombshell that happened in this case where Dave Halls, who was the assistant director, who pled no contest to a misdemeanor charge of negligently handling the firearm, he said that it was Hannah Gutierrez Reed who actually gave the weapon to Alec Baldwin. We were always under the impression she had handed it over to the AD, to Dave Halls, and then he gave it to Baldwin. Is that the right protocol there? I mean, we're trying to figure out who did what. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't put much stock in anything Dave Halls said. Going beyond that, though, the armorer handles the gun, checks the gun, loads the gun, gives it to the actor, watches the actor, makes sure the actor doesn't do anything stupid with it, like point it at someone. And then when they're finished with the rehearsal or the shot, the actor hands the gun back. No, I shouldn't say that. The armorer takes the gun back, re-clears it, and puts it back in safe storage. So nobody should be touching the gun other than the armorer and the actor.
Yeah.
So if Dave in fact didn't touch the gun, well, good on him. He got something right.
We're getting a couple of super chats. I wanted to get your opinion on it. I'll give mine and then I'll give yours. First of all, we have one from, where is it? Oh, so we have a Marno Frank super chat. Why didn't Hannah testify? Someone died because she didn't do her job and she didn't testify. Now, I'm going to couple that with a regular chat that we got from Salt and Peppa. Why didn't she testify? So here's my perspective. Number one, she didn't have to, right? This is not kind of like a self-defense case where someone needs to take the stand to explain why they took a specific action, why they felt the need to use deadly force. And that's not the only case that people take the stand. Some sort of explanation. But also, she said so much in her police interview that A, she would have to make sure that she was consistent, and B, she would have so much to explain away, she could possibly put herself in a worse position. Having said that, Steve, if she did decide to take the stand, and you could give and I love your opinion about why you think she didn't do it, but if she had taken the stand, would there have been something you'd be looking out for that would have said, I can see what she's saying there, or that might give you pause?
Yeah, if she said, "I plead the fifth," I could understand that because I could look up what that amendment is. Um, Everything else, wouldn't make sense. So first of all, she doesn't have to take the stand because it's on the state. They have the onus of responsibility to prove their case, not her to defend her case. So in that regard, there's no reason that she should take the stand. She also probably shouldn't have said anything in those police interviews. And I think, if her lawyer had been doing their job, they just would have kept saying, you don't have to answer that question. And she didn't have to answer any questions. And this really, not that I'm excusing anything that Hannah did or failed to do, but, once you're a suspect in something, your absolute best policy is shut the up, because everything you say is just going to put you in deeper.
I agree. I don't think there would have been much benefit for her to take the stand. I say that because the defense has created a little bit of a situation for the jury where they said not for them to find her not guilty because of sympathy, but they wanted people to understand she was an inexperienced young armorer who was dealing with an A-list movie star who was bossing people around, was creating a very hectic set, was rushing things. They say that could she really be expected to just halt the production, to tell Alec Baldwin, wait a minute, I need to be there. You've been on sets before. You know how this works. Is there any credence to that argument that it would have been very, very difficult for Hannah Gutierrez Reed to jump in and say, listen, we need more safety here. We need to slow things down? That argument, I wonder if it be compelling to
There's
jurors.
some credence to that, and I've seen it happen. And uh, it's on the production company that they hired someone inexperienced. The actual what do I have to know to make these guns safe is very simple. I mean, I've successfully taught that to 6-year-olds and they get it. But more importantly, on set, you have to have presence, and you have to have a sense that you have the authority to stop things when they're not going safely. And she didn't feel that she had that, by virtue of her age, by virtue of her inexperience, and by virtue of the disparity between her credibility in the industry and Mr. Baldwin's. So
Hmm.
she would feel, I believe she would feel, going out on a limb if she said, "Stop, this isn't safe. I need to check everything again. I'm going to hold the production up because of it," which was just the consequence. But that is absolutely the job of the armorer. And I'm sure, having grown up with Thel Reed, a very experienced armorer, as her dad, she must have seen him do that. But you have to go in there. If you're the armorer, you have to be like the Marines drill sergeant. Hand me that gun, point that gun at the ground. We are not moving forward until I render this safe. Anyone who has a problem with that, I'm taking my guns and going home. You find someone else to run your set, because I'm not going to be involved in these shenanigans. Because what the evidence is, when you don't stop because you saw something go wrong, people die. I mean, this is what happened with the space shuttle, right? People knew, they didn't say anything. No one wants to stop the launch of the space shuttle. So now you have defective O-rings that lots of people knew about, and dead astronauts in a catastrophe. Now we have dead Halyna Hutchins because nobody put up their hand and said, "Can I see that gun?" And everyone on the set has the right to stop the production at any time if they feel like there is a safety question. And it doesn't matter. It could be the caterer, the wardrobe, the
Right.
hairstylist. Anyone who's in that room has a right to say, "Show me that gun, open the cylinder, show me what's going on in there, and shake those rounds for me, because I'm in this room and I'm in danger and I have a right to know the condition of that gun." And no one did.
And that's the main theme here. This shouldn't have happened, but there is an important element that we're going to get into it. It's actually being addressed by one of the people who's sending us questions. Again, send your questions in our live chat. The super chat is the best way to get your message up there. We have a couple of super chats I'm going to throw our way, Steve. So first of all, this is from TDB. Thank you so much for the super chat. Is Hannah facing civil lawsuits? P.S. Love the hair. Thank you, Steve. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That is
I
just
know.
mean. I didn't have to include the
Maybe it
second
was
part, but
Hannah's hair. I mean, no,
that's
it might not have been directed to us. I mean, Hannah's
it's
had quite a
true.
makeover.
Yeah.
You know,
You know what? You're right. Why am I? It's all about me all the time.
I
I'm
mean, you
sorry.
do
I'm
have
sorry.
great hair. You know,
Well, thank you. Thank you.
nothing away from that.
So yes, she has been facing litigation. In fact, the latest that I had heard is she had been sued by the gaffer of this production, Rust. But there was a talk a few months back, and forgive me, I don't remember the latest of it, but that she was going to be dropped from that lawsuit for jurisdictional purposes. I believe the person had sued her from California, and she didn't have the right amount of contacts or connection to California, which is something you need in a lawsuit. But remember, the standard of proof is different in a civil case than it is in a criminal case. And we have seen before times where someone could be found not guilty of a crime, but then sued because you're dealing with proof beyond a reasonable doubt, our highest
O.J.
standard.
Simpson.
Yeah, exactly. O.J. Simpson or preponderance of the evidence, which is just more likely than not than something happened. So in this case, Steve, it would be much more easy for someone to find her civilly liable for negligence than criminally liable for involuntary manslaughter.
So I doubt that Hannah has the money to hire an attorney hourly, which means that any attorney who took the case against her would be taking it on a contingency basis, which means they're going to get a third of what? You know, a third of the earnings of someone who's never going to get hired in the film industry again. I don't even know how that got filed or why someone would take the case, other than for the publicity.
Yep. It's a good point. All right, we got some more super chats. Carl B, tell us your hair care routine. That's about me. That one's about me. I'm going to take that one, but I'm not going to answer it now. Carl B, I'll tell you that on the other side when I have Steve. I have Steve here, but no. Thank you for the super chat. I'll get to that. Another super chat. K Cruz, regardless of the script, she still put a live round in the gun. She knew the scope of her position and the consequences of not performing it well. So I would answer that, Kay Cruz, and say the jury doesn't have to find definitively that she put the live round in the gun. It could be that she just failed to even check the gun. That could be in and out. It could be that she put the live round in there and she failed to check, or it could be she didn't put the live round in and or failed to check. So that's the way the prosecution has charged her, and it's a very wide way of charging her. So as I mentioned before, the jury has a lot of leeway to find her guilty. Now, your second part, that she knew the consequences of not performing it well. You know what's interesting about that, Steve, is when I was listening to her police interrogation and what she was saying on the body cam, some of the first comments were, I'm a failure. My career is over. I don't want anybody seeing me. She immediately
These
knew
were
that
accurate
she could be.
statements, by the way.
Yeah, she knew that she could be. She was responsible.
Right. Well, just because you feel guilty about something doesn't mean that you're responsible for it. But in these cases, I think these were the three most accurate statements that she's made in the case, and I think the prosecution is absolutely right. You're guilty if you put live ammo in there, and you're guilty if you failed to check that there was live ammo in there. So that's a damned if you do situation right there.
Yep, that's a good point. So let me move
But the
on.
presumption is that there's ammo. The presumption is that there is live ammo in every gun, and that's why the first rule of gun safety. Some people say, assume all guns are. It's not assume. This is life and death, and so, we're not in the realm of make believe. So when I state the first rule of gun safety, I say all guns are always loaded, and that is a fact until proven otherwise. And therefore, every time a gun is handled by anyone who touches it, it is their responsibility to ascertain the condition of that firearm.
We got more
Whether there's
questions.
live ammo, no ammo, dummy round, blank, whatever, the gun's in your hand. It's your responsibility to know the condition of the gun.
That's where I stand. I mean, again, unless they presented evidence that she checked the gun, handed it over, and someone secretly put in ammunition or tampered with the gun in some way, I just feel since she was the last line of defense, and that's why you have an armor. But I do have some specific questions for you, Steve. So we have another super chat. Thank you so much. From Awakened Warrior. A new armorer should be required to have years on set with a professional armorer before they could be qualified to take on that role on their own. What's your thought?
Disagree. Recommended, good practice. Mentorship is absolutely the way to learn. But what they actually have to learn to do physically is simply to, open the cylinder or check a magazine or check the chamber, make sure that there's nothing in there. And then if they do put something in there, it has to come from this box. It has to look like this. It has to sound like this. And it doesn't take years of experience to know how to do that. So the standard of what you have to do physically and mentally to do your job properly is very, very simple. And the reason for wanting to have a lot of experience at it is to have the presence, the physical and commanding presence that people respect you and listen to you, because what you say is the law. That if someone violates the safety protocols that you set up, you pack those guns up and you get off set,
Well,
and that's
and,
it. You
and
let
I
them
think
figure it out.
there was ample evidence to suggest that Alec Baldwin did not respect Hannah Gutierrez Reed. I mean, there was on the tape, one of the pieces of footage from Rust. He's instructed her on how to do her job because she didn't have another gun ready to go. Now, I will tell you, I imagined Awakened Warrior has asked this question because it seemed to me the evidence would suggest production was cutting costs and they wanted to find a cheap armor that they could then throw the prop duties on her as well. So I think that was the concern, having this inexperienced armor on set, probably cutting costs, but also throw more duties at her that probably weren't the best thing. And that doesn't take away from what could be responsible for. But I think that's the problem too, is the fact that she was hired in the first place.
That's right. She didn't have the experience. She had one movie under her belt. She'd received safety violation complaints on that film. And so therefore she would be the least expensive option. And that's really not, you don't want to go into battle with equipment made by the low bidder. And the same thing on the movie set. Now, if you want to hire an experienced caterer or an experienced hairstylist, maybe you wouldn't personally like that, but the consequences of that are minor. But the armorer, that's a position where if they don't do their job right, it's pretty obvious someone's going to die. So that's not the place to skimp.
Now, again, I actually answered a question. This was from Marno Frank, a super chat. Thank you so much, Marno, for this additional super chat. Do you think the low budget that the film had played a role? A low budget film doesn't mean you don't be professional. So good question. I think we answered that. We have another question that I wanted to ask you. This is from Chris, another super chat. Live reloaded rounds are made with unique components. Why not ID the origin of the live ammo and who reloaded them? It doesn't seem very difficult. Now, before I give you the mic here, Steve, about that, it's a great question because we were trying to figure out where the live ammunition came from, and there was testimony and evidence to suggest that it did not come from Seth Kenney and PDQ because the live ammo that was recovered on the set, and there were 6 rounds that were recovered, did not match the live ammo that the company had. So what's your take on Chris's super chat question?
That it's a curiosity, but irrelevant to the case. Sure, if you want to know where the ammo came from, you can, go hunt down that trail. But it doesn't matter. The fact is that the issue that are germane to this case are that someone put it into the gun without checking, and that no one checked what was in there. So the prosecution is absolutely right on this case. Why did you put live ammo in a gun? Why didn't you check that there was not, what should have been in there? Failure to check that there was live ammo. So those are the 2 relevant things. I don't really care who manufactured the powder and who, put the primer in, who seated the round. I mean,
well,
okay,
the defense would be
if you want to have a tool.
Yeah, but the defense is suggesting, since we don't have answers to this question, since it wasn't thoroughly vetted about whether there was some sort of sabotage, the prosecution cannot prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They're saying the jury needs all the answers. And that's a fair argument. But like you and I both discussed, even if there was sabotage, even if someone put those live rounds in, if she checked it before handing it off to Baldwin, that feels to me kind of like the slam dunk of this case. Steve Wolf?
Exactly. And someone absolutely, they could have said, Hannah, could you bring some live ammo? Because, on break, the stunt guys want to go out and shoot some tin cans or whatever. Fine. Live ammo could have got left in there that way as well. So it doesn't matter, though. If you clear the gun before you hand it to somebody, no death.
Steve Wolf, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much for being so generous with your time and expertise. I know you've been on the network as well. Really appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to continue on taking your questions. Let me just, Steve was great. I'm just now going to answer this question. This is from Carl B. Tell us your hair care routine. I didn't think it was appropriate to have that conversation yet. I'll have it now. Real quick, this is a secret, but you sent in a super chat, so I'll have to tell you. It's a combination of blow drying, it's a combination of using a hat, and it's a combination of using forming cream, not gel, forming cream. Years in the making. It took a lot of practice. A good super chat, nonetheless. All right. Before we get to more of your questions, I have the results of the poll as of right now. Remember the poll? If Hannah Gutierrez Reed is found guilty, do you think Alec Baldwin will meet the same fate? Well, it looks like, wow, 58% of you say yes, 26% of you say no, and 15% of you say you're not sure. Really, really interesting there. You know what? I'm going to actually ask my next guest about that. Now, remember, this is kind of two different levels of responsibility. They both could be held criminally responsible. One loaded the gun, or allegedly loaded the gun. One allegedly fired the gun. And you could have two causes for the same event. So it's a really interesting question. Keep that coming in. Again, send your chats into the live chat. Send your questions into the live chat. But if you want your message up at the front, we'll read it right here and now. Super chat, the best way to get your message to the top. All right. I want to bring in my next guest. We have with us Natalie Whittingham Burrell, criminal defense attorney, YouTuber. Natalie, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So let me just pause. Let me throw that question to you. If Hannah Gutierrez Reed is found guilty, how does this affect Alec Baldwin's case? Because I will tell you, and as I mentioned, there was a lot that came out in this trial so far against him. A lot about the weapon, a lot about his behavior. What's your take?
So my take is that from a defense standpoint, which is the type of attorney I am, I'm a criminal defense attorney, Alec Baldwin's attorneys are going to throw everything on Hannah Gutierrez. They're going to basically, if she's found guilty. So she'll become the scapegoat for the defense team. And I think that that could in some way benefit the defense. But also, he does have a level of involvement that if they can prove the case against her beyond a reasonable doubt, the prosecution might feel stronger that they can prove the case against Alec Baldwin. So I think it's a matter of how much confidence it gives each side, right? Because he'll get his own separate trial with his own separate evidence. But I am pretty sure the defense strategy will be to put everything on Hannah Gutierrez, especially if she's found guilty.
See, the problem with him is that he was really rushing the production, and he was at one point telling Hannah Gutierrez Reed how to do her job, which I can imagine a prosecutor saying, you felt so confident on how to tell the job. He knows how this works. He knows how these sets work. He knows how these firearms work. And the fact that he had previously said he didn't pull the trigger, which, again, is a problem because of the ballistics evidence that came out, which we'll talk about. But we have some super chats here that I want to get to. So this is from Johnny's Girl. Thank you so much for sending the super chat. She should not be the only one charged. Sarah, meaning Sarah Zachary, is just as guilty. Throwing away rounds is tampering with evidence. Alec is also guilty. Your thoughts, Natalie?
Yeah, I think throwing away rounds is really problematic. I mean, I don't see any other way to really look at that. And I throw it back to what you said originally, Jesse, which is his initial story that he didn't pull the trigger is laughable. Anything that knows anything about modern day guns knows that that doesn't happen anymore. You pull the trigger. You have to pull the trigger. And so that's why every single time you carry a gun, you have to act as though it is deadly and dangerous and take all the necessary steps to make sure that it's safe. And so I think that there were enough things that came out about Alec Baldwin here that would seriously hurt his case. And that really his attorneys' real hope would be to take all the responsibility from him and put it on someone else.
We have a great super chat question about this. This is IR Geek. Thank you so much for the super chat. The state's expert armor witness said that actors aren't expected to check, but at least 3 others were. So how could Baldwin be responsible? Now, I don't remember exactly the 3 others that testified to that, but I would say as the producer of the film And
right.
as somebody who was supposed to get the proper training but allegedly wasn't paying attention, and one of the lead actors who was handling weapons on a fair basis, that's what sets him apart. Would you agree?
Yeah, so the level of responsibility is not the responsibility of an actor on set. The level of responsibility comes from his role as a producer. And I know that we've heard from one of the attorneys of one of the other gentlemen involved that's already pled in the case that said that basically he wasn't in charge of the guns and he was only a
David
producer.
Halls. David Halls?
Yes,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the money side, I don't think that that's right. I think that it's clear that he had more of a level of involvement as a producer, and that's going to give him a certain level of responsibility than, say, an extra on the set that was just handling a gun.
We have another question that I wanted to get to. This is from, where is it? Words 789. Will the OSHA findings hold much weight on jury deliberations? Now, we obviously don't know, but what I would say is I think that was such an important piece of evidence for the defense. We know the prosecution didn't want it in. When you have an OSHA report, and yes, they're an independent agency, different, they're looking at something different than what prosecutors are looking at. But the fact they came forward and basically said that it was the management who had all these series of failures that they didn't address that resulted in the shooting, and you're putting the blame on them and saying that they didn't give Hannah Gutierrez Reed the adequate time to do what she needed to do, that's compelling, if not inconsistent with testimony that we heard that Hannah Gutierrez Reed was given extra armor days. And on the day in question, she left the church to do not other duties, not prop duties, but armor duties. So she could have stayed in the church. How much more would it have taken her to check the cylinder? Because allegedly she didn't check the cylinder properly before giving the gun over to Alec Baldwin or Dave Halls, depending upon who you believe. But it seems to me that the OSHA findings could be something that the jury wrestles with. No?
I really don't think so because Miss Gutierrez, the duty that she did have and what she had control over did not seem to be following through on her duties. And negligence. And so she had a duty and responsibility as an armorer. And the facts to me did not bear out that she was prevented from following through with her duties. Other failures definitely happened along the way, and those other people are accountable. But she was one of the cogs in the machine that failed, and she had a responsibility not to fail. That's how I would look at that. Now, if the facts had borne out that she did everything that she could do, but she was actually prevented from doing those things, then I would feel differently. I just don't think that that's how that might be their argument, but that's not how the facts were presented to the jury.
So, great super chat question right here from very original 78. And this is a very original question from very original 78. And thank you for the super chat. Does Jesse have any advice for attorneys / future attorneys about things to do / keep in mind when handling a case like this? Now, I'm going to go to you too, Natalie, on this. I will say, first of all, we should keep in mind that Carrie Morrissey, who is the prosecutor in this case, is not a prosecutor by trade. She is a defense attorney that was brought on as a special prosecutor. And there has been a lot of debate. And I will tell you this. One of the things I don't love to see is the back and forth between the attorneys that seems to me to be unprofessional at times. And I'm reminded that you have two defense attorneys against each other, right? And so you kind of see that battle of back and forth. And you don't want to see it. The jury shouldn't have to see it. But it's gotten nasty at times. And she's provided a lot of speaking objections that have gone on for quite some time. Not to criticize her, because I actually think that she and her team have put on a terrific case. If you're going to charge somebody with involuntary manslaughter for these set of facts, I think the evidence has been incredibly compelling. In terms of the defense, look, I think they have some difficult facts to contend with. Are they throwing a lot at the wall to see what sticks, saying, it was Seth Kenney, it was this person, it was sabotage, it was, the OSHA report says that the managers and the producers were at fault, not her. Their job is to raise reasonable doubt and raise questions. And I think that's what they're trying to do. They've been given a really bad set of facts here. But Natalie, I will ask you, I don't particularly see anything that they should do differently in terms of presenting their cases. Not sure if you feel differently.
I would say that, when you talk about the tussling back and forth that's occurring in front of the jury, I really try to avoid that in my own trials. And the reason being is this. When you're at the bench, in a bench conference with the husher on where the jury can't hear you, the rest of the court can't hear you, you can get a bit more spicy, but you don't know how the jury is perceiving. For me, it's the prosecutor who's the other side for me. You don't know how they're perceiving that person. And so they might really like them or something or identify with them. They might look like their daughter or niece or nephew. And here you are kind of going back and forth with them. So I try to quell that as much as possible. I think it's important to remain it's an adversarial system, but you do not have to be nasty and disagreeable in order to advocate for your client very zealously. And I think
Yep.
sometimes remember that you really do catch more bees with honey than with vinegar. When making very stringent arguments, doing so with a smile and catching people off guard by being nice while you're being nasty is very effective. So that's one of the biggest. I always tell the young students that I deal with in my profession about that. Kill them with kindness. It really does help.
All right. Some great legal advice from Natalie Whittingham Burrell. Thank you so much for coming on. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you taking the time. Love talking to you, Natalie. We've got to get you on more.
Thanks. Thank you, Jesse. Oh, can I just say one thing before I go? I don't want to kill your
Absolutely.
schedule.
Absolutely.
Okay. I saw someone in the comments say, "Is that Natalie Lawyer Chick?" So yes, that is Natalie Lawyer Chick. I'm here on YouTube. Sorry. Okay,
Is
bye.
that your yeah, promote.
Yeah,
Is that your handle? Is that your YouTube
yeah,
site?
yeah.
Okay.
And I never say that on here. So yes, one of my subscribers is in the comment section and says I need to say
Awesome.
my name. So I'm
There you
saying it.
go. Love it.
Thanks,
Love it.
guys.
All right,
All right.
famous. Natalie,
All
thank you
right.
so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, so we're going to take more of your questions, more of your comments, throw them up in the live chat. Again, super chat, the best way to get those questions up to the top. We'll make sure to answer them. We're going to get back to that poll in a little bit. One question we have, a super chat from Alano. I would, I would love to sniff your hair. Is it minty or more of a musk? This is a family show. This is a family show, Alano. I appreciate the question. Minty. Okay, let's before we go forward, I want to just take a minute here. I want to take a minute, get serious, to thank our incredible partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, that makes so much of this happen for us. Look, when we're dealing with the Russ case, what does that show? It shows that these tragic, unfortunate events, they can happen when you least expect it. And that includes when you get injured. It is so important to know what your rights are if you're ever seriously hurt and whether your injury could be worth millions of dollars. That is why Morgan & Morgan, who I want to talk about right now, the largest injury law firm in the country, that's where they come in. So they will fight for the compensation you deserve. And you know why they're so big? You know why? Because they win a lot. They recently won verdicts of $6.8 million in New York, $12 million in Florida, and $26 million in Philadelphia. You see, Morgan & Morgan, they don't settle for these lowball offers from insurance companies. And here, these verdicts, they were all considerably higher than the highest insurance offers for these accidents. Fighting big companies, it takes a big firm. Now, what makes Morgan & Morgan also very special is not just how big they are, it's how easy they make it for their clients. They've completely modernized the process. You submit your claim, you talk to your whole legal team, all from your smartphone. You can see if you have a case in only a few minutes. And get this, the fee, absolutely free unless you win. So to start your claim now with Morgan & Morgan, go to forthepeople.com/LC sidebar, or I believe you can click the link if we have it up or it's pinned in the comments. Hopefully it is. But check out Morgan & Morgan. Again, we very much appreciate their support. All right, we got another super chat, and then I'm going to bring in my next guest. Ava Smith. Oh, just Ava Smith being so kind with a super donation, super chat. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the support. We have another question. What is your over-under prediction regarding the length of deliberations? It's like asking me what the lottery numbers are going to be. It's impossible to know. But I will take a guess. I don't think they're coming back in the next 10 minutes. I don't think they're coming back today. This is a complicated case. I would not be surprised if they come back tomorrow. They're going to be deliberating. I think they'll be able to deliberate for several hours today. Some difficult questions. And remember, something to let everybody know that we haven't talked about yet is the jury has to find unanimously if they want to vote in favor of involuntary manslaughter, they have to be unanimous. That's clear, right? And remember, I said there were two alternative theories by which they could find Hannah Gutierrez Reed guilty of involuntary manslaughter. If they do not reach a unanimous verdict on involuntary manslaughter, that's it. They don't move on to the other question. If they are unanimous on that not guilty for involuntary manslaughter, only then can they decide whether or not she is guilty of a lesser charge of negligent use of a firearm. And of course, they have to find her, the verdict has to be unanimous there. That is a lesser charge. My understanding is a misdemeanor. But a negligent use of a deadly weapon or firearm consists of endangering the safety of another by handling or using a firearm or other deadly weapon in a negligent manner. And the reason I say that is I was actually listening to the jury instructions today, thinking about the case and saying, I wonder if the jury is going to say she needs to be held criminally responsible. We just don't believe it rises to the level of manslaughter. Perhaps they would find her guilty of that. We shall wait and see. All right. So as we get more of your super chat questions in and more of your chat questions in, let me bring in my next guest. We're joined by Lisa Tarraco, criminal defense attorney. So good to have you here, Lisa. Really, really appreciate it. By the way, first of all, I haven't seen you in a while. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Excellent. Perfect.
Not bad,
Thank you.
right? Not bad after
Yeah,
not
very
doing
good.
it.
And I like your hair. You look good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So talk to me about what you think has been the most compelling evidence on the part of the prosecution in this case, and the most compelling evidence you think on the defense's side.
Well, as you know, I'm Dave Hall's lawyer. And so I'm going to start with Mr. Hall's because I thought he gave, contrary to other people's opinions, I thought he gave amazing testimony. And I thought he helped both the defense and the prosecution. I felt like he had the least motive to lie because we've already litigated his case. He came in very early on, wanted to take responsibility, and pled guilty to the misdemeanor. So I feel like he had no motive to lie. He's not suing anyone. He's being sued. But he has no money, so it's not like they're going to, collect a whole lot. So I felt like he testified with a lot of integrity. He made a comment at the end of his testimony that surprised me, but he said, look, I wanted to come to tell the truth because there's all these other stories out there. And, I want people to know what really happened. And I want changes in the industry. And I thought it was very heartfelt. And I thought that gave him credibility. And so he testified that he did not give the gun to Baldwin.
Yeah, can we highlight that for a second? Because that was a big surprise to a lot of people. We had always been under the impression that the chain of command, the chain of custody was Hannah Gutierrez Reed had handed the weapon to your client, Dave Halls. He gave the weapon to Alec Baldwin. Now, again, Alec Baldwin had previously said, yes, I believe he had first said that it was Hannah Gutierrez. He first said that Dave Halls had handed him the weapon. Then he changed it and said it was Hannah Gutierrez Reed who gave him the weapon. Hannah Gutierrez Reed has always said that Dave Halls gave Alec Baldwin the weapon. But that was a big surprise to a lot of us.
Mm-hmm. And I think what